Okay, thank you all for coming, and I'm really very, very grateful to Professor Heidi Shaker for, did I pronounce your name correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so for giving me the opportunity to talk about Rabindranath Tagore, who is very dear to my heart. So the main focus today is to talk about how he incorporated, peace in his life. So what I plan to do is I'll talk about his life and you'll see how he incorporated these rather than me always trying to explain to you. You'll see, maybe I'll make a few comments, but most of the time I'll just leave it to you to see how relevant Tagore is in today's world when we see so much conflict happening around us. The way he, resolved lots of conflicts shows us the way that we can also handle conflicts around us. So I'll start with one of his, so he wrote like 2,025 songs. He wrote the lyrics and he also composed the music. And that's a separate genre of music in the Indian music scene. So I'm going to read the translation of one of the songs, and I actually performed this song in one of the interfaith service in fall. So I'll just read that first. Drench the earth with showers of peace. The world awakes with parched up hearts. Let there be no darkness, no lust, no grief. Let the heart glow, let life strengthen, brushing aside barriers. Why this hatred, this pretense, this angst? Spread the word of love in frozen hearts. Hail, hail to thee. So Rabindranath Tagore was born on May 7th in Kolkata, which is a city in West Bengal, India. He was a polymath. He was a poet, philosopher, educator, academician, composer, missionary, a social reformer, and much more. He wrote 12 novels, 3,000 poems, 2,025 songs for which he composed the music, innumerable short stories, essays, letters, and plays. He started painting at the age of 70, and he produced 2,500 artworks and had exhibitions all over the world, including in Boston and New York. He founded a school named Shanti Niketan, which means the abode of peace. Shanti in Sanskrit means peace. Niketan means abode. So abode of peace. This was an experimental school. And he also founded a university eventually, which he called Vishwa Bharati. Vishwa means the world, and Bharati means Bharatvarsha is India. So India's connection to the world. He was the first Asian to get the Nobel Prize in literature. Not literature, he was the first Asian Nobel laureate in 1913. So he was born on May 7th, 1861 in Calcutta, in his ancestral home. The family over 300 years of history has been one of the leading families of Kolkata and is regarded as an influence during the Bengal Renaissance. So what is the Bengal Renaissance? So at this time in the Indian scenario, the British Indians were the British colony. So the administration was the British administration. Calcutta was their capital. So everything was happening in Calcutta. So Bengal Renaissance refers to a social reform movement during the 19th and early 20th centuries in the region of Bengal in undivided India during the period of British rule. 19th century Bengal was a unique blend of religious and social reformers, scholars, literary giants, journalists, patriotic orators, scientists, all merging to form the image of a Renaissance and mark the transition from the medieval to the modern. During this period, Bengal witnessed an intellectual awakening, which was also, in some sense, challenging for the influence of an alien colonialism. The Tagore family produced several people who contributed substantially to the fields of business, social, and religious reformation. So this is his ancestral home. Literature, art, and music. Rabindranath's father, Maharishi Rabindranatrh Tagore, was one of the initiators of the emerging religion called Brahmo, which was based on the ancient Vedas and the Upanishads, but it promoted absolute monism. So that was the characteristic of this new religion.
Absolute what?
Monism. So formless. Rabindranath was the 14th child of his parents, and many of his siblings were also very talented. They were musicians, philosophers, mathematicians, writers, singers, playwrights. Tagore started writing at a very early age, and his first book of poetry, Evening Songs, was published when he was 17. So this is his home. I have performed here. This is his father. So these are some of the other social reformers, like he was the one who started the religion Brahmo, and Tagore's father was also a big supporter of that. This is another social reformer. His name is Dr. So he did a lot for women empowerment, women's education, etc. So Tagore, when he was 6 years old, this is his elder brother, who was also very talented, but unfortunately eclipsed by the immense talent of Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore. So he started writing at a very early age. His first book of poetry came out when he was 17, and it was called The Evening Songs. Tagore went to 4 different schools in his childhood, but discontinued each one with extreme intimidation, and that left a lasting impact on his life. He was homeschooled. So apart from Bengali, which was his mother tongue, he was taught Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, and English. Sciences, music, and bodybuilding. Apart from homeschooling, his father, Maharishi Rabindranath, used to make long trips to the Himalayan mountains and would take Tagore with him. And he got hands-on education, starting from the ancient texts, the Vedas and the Upanishads. And also, Rabindranath asked him to manage the day-to-day expenses, so to give him, an overall training for life. So here he is with his father. This is a beautiful painting by another member of the Tagore family who was a great painter. They had many great painters, so this is Rabindranath Tagore's painting. In 1878, Tagore joined the University College of London to study law, but he did not finish it. He did not like it. But what impressed him very much was the music there. So he came back to India and he wrote the first opera in the Bengali language. He incorporated many Western tunes which impressed him, like the Scottish and Irish folk tunes, along with, the traditional classical style of Indian music. And the story was based on how the Indian epic Ramayana, which is one of the most famous Indian epic, the story behind how this epic was written. So that was the subject of the opera. So it has, everything from all parts of the world, which was really nice. At the age of 22, he got married to Mrinalini Devi. So this is in London. So he got married at the age of 22, and his father, Rabindranath, asked him to look after the family estates in the eastern part of Bengal, which is now Bangladesh. At this time, he spent a lot of solitary days in a boat in the rural Bengal, in complete solitude, watched the village life on the river bank. During this period, his creativity soared high, and he incorporated a lot of this rural life into his fiction. Also, so this is their house in the estate, but he spent a lot of time on this boat. He used to stay in this boat and look at the river bank. Also, the folk music of Bengal left a lasting impression on his musical style and infiltrated into his songs unknowingly. Tagore was becoming aware of the social inequality around him. He was deeply concerned and wanted to make a change. Though he was managing his estates very efficiently, he felt an urgent need to address these inequalities. He brought a significant change in the social setup also by abolishing the segregation practiced in the name of religion and caste systems. He abolished the age-old system of segregating seating arrangements among the villagers in his estates and arranged for a uniform, seating for all of them. So at this time in India, so he was like the landlord of the estate. So the custom was the landlord would sit on a very authoritative chair, which was sometimes called the throne, like he's a king, and all the villagers would sit on the floor, but in the floor there were different arrangements. For the high caste Brahmin, the Hindus, there was like nice fancy mattresses. For the other Hindus who are not as high caste as the Brahmins, there will be like, some simple rug to sit on, and the Muslims will be sitting on the floor. So that was the arrangement. So he talked to his managers of the estate and said, this is absolutely unacceptable. I cannot really go on with this. There will be just one uniform sitting arrangement for everyone, including me. We'll all sit on the floor on one mattress. If somebody thinks that they are going to get impure, clearly referring to the high caste Hindus, they have to make their own arrangements. So his managers were totally scandalized because this was like something existing going on for centuries. So they said this is not doable, but he was very, very firm. He stuck to his decision and he made this change in his estate. He also started organizing cooperative schools, hospitals in the villages of his estates and tried to introduce improved farming methods. All these efforts for rural reconstruction went on while he pursued his creative writing and family life. Tagore called this period the sadhana. Sadhana is an Indian word used in Sanskrit, which means trying to do something totally, wholeheartedly, and perfectly. So he also started microfinancing in his estate, which was later on vastly popularized by the Nobel laureate from Bangladesh, Muhammad Yunus, who got the Nobel Prize for that. So he started this in his estate. In 1901, at this time, he had 5 children, and he was seriously thinking about their education, and he did not want them to send to the schools from where he returned. He couldn't continue. So he's seriously thinking what to do about their education. He was homeschooling, but he had in mind that he would set up an experimental school. So the place he chose for that is this, the Shantiniketan, the abode of peace. So this was again a family estate in the western part of Bengal. And Tagore's father set up a place of worship there to worship the absolute formless being, so the absolute monism. So here Tagore decided that he will set up his school. The style of the school was inspired by the forest hermitage of classical India. He needed money for this. He sold the copyrights of all his books. His wife sold all her jewelries and started the school in a very modest setting. It was to be run on the pattern of teachers and pupils living together amidst natural surroundings and willingly accepting an austere standard of living, often working with their own hands. No fees were accepted from the students. All expenses were borne by Tagore himself. The curriculum was very flexible. The students could choose what level they wanted to study for a particular subjects. Classes were held in open air under the trees. In the course of time, the school expanded as the poet's reputation grew. So this is Tagore with his eldest daughter and son. And many tragedies actually struck his life. Of the 5 children, he lost 3 of them during his lifetime. So this is the prayer hall, and this is how the classes were conducted under the trees. Life at Shantiniketan left an impression on the poet's literary work. He wrote about India's past and present, stories of noble self-sacrifice, He was trying to discover the eternal India that succeeds in practicing inclusivity and achieving unity amidst a bewildering diversity of races, cultures, and religions. You know, like we have 22 official languages. We don't have any national language, but 22 different official languages and several dialects. So that's the diversity of India. The students were not only trained academically, but they were trained to take care of their own day-to-day needs. All employees were treated equally with respect. It was customary for the students to greet any new employee at the school with flowers and folded hands, which is a Indian gesture to show respect. Be it an educator or a cook or a janitor, it was the same way everyone was welcomed into the school. He admitted girl students, which was not extremely common those days. The girls stayed indoors. They were not exposed to education, but he started admitting girl students, staged dance dramas, plays, and music, where for the first time, women from the mainstream Indian society started to perform. Before, in the creative stage, it was the courtesans, the women courtesans who would perform, but not from the mainstream society. So again, he started another revolution, so to say, by staging this, the mainstream women. Now, coming back to the history of India at that time, the British governor, Lord Curzon, wanted to divide the province of Bengal into two parts based on the religion, Hindu and Muslim. So this policy was called divide and rule. So this was, of course, a political move. He was apprehensive about the growing unrest and dissatisfaction among the Indians with the British Raj and thought this policy of divide and rule will be effective. But to the contrary, it enraged the Bengalis, and they all got together on the streets of the two main cities, Dhaka in Bangladesh, now Bangladesh, it was India at that time, and Kolkata in India. Tagore wrote a series of patriotic songs for this occasion, for this protest, led many of these processions. So, as you can see, besides his creative life and life as an educator, he was always conscious about what is happening around him. And he felt that it's his responsibility to do a protest, but peacefully always. But of course, the British were very powerful. They did divide Bengal into two parts on October 16, 1905. As a protest, Tagore urged all Bengalis, irrespective of their religions, to be on the streets to tie Rakhi. So Rakhi is an Indian festival where a sister ties a Rakhi around the brother's wrist to protect him as he goes out to work. So this is a traditional ancient festival, tradition where the women were staying indoors, so they're tying this Rakhi to the brothers. So Tagore lifted it to a totally different platform. So he urged all Bengalis to tie Rakhi to each other's wrists. The Hindus and the Muslims were tying Rakhi to each other's wrists, and he wrote another song, just give me 1 second, another song to sing for this occasion. Let the soil, the rivers, and the forests of Bengal be one and remain one. Let the brothers and sisters of Bengal be one and remain one forever. Yes.
I think we don't know what Rakhi is.
Oh, so Rakhi is a festival. It's like a small wristband. So it's a festival which happens in the month of August, where a sister ties that band around the brother's wrist to protect him from the outside dangers. So that was lifted on a totally different context and platform, where the Hindus and Muslims were tying Rakhi to each other and singing this song. But here is something that we also have to note. As much Tagore opposed unreasonable policies taken by the British administration, he was equally vocal in criticizing the nationalists who resorted to violence against the British administration. He remained a non-conformist all his life. He was a big victim for that also. So as I'm going to tell you, the British Raj did not leave him peacefully. The abode of peace was constantly raided and scrutinized by the British administration because he was protesting against their decisions, and they thought that he, harbored the nationalists in his school, which was not true. And later on, I'll see how the nationalists also, lashed against him. In the meantime, Tagore was very active in all his creative aspect, and Shantiniketan continued to grow. He included the nearby villagers in his school system in various capacities, again, irrespective of their caste, creed, and religion. He sent, so here this was a Hindu majority area, he sent some of his most trusted Hindu employees in the Muslim neighborhoods and had them stay with the Muslim families who were minority to understand their values, culture, and priorities. This instilled a sense of trust and security among the Muslims. They felt secure and comfortable and got involved in the school activities more and more. In the times of religious conflicts, the same Hindu employees who spent time with the Muslim families were asked to sort out the differences and solve the conflicts peacefully. Tagore made sure that all villagers were treated equally. At this time, he got much involved with rural welfare, incorporated a lot of festivals in the school celebrating the nature. Apart from each seasonal celebration, for each occasion, he would present the students with new bouquet of songs, which they'll perform. He introduced the celebration of Holokoshon, which means plowing the land, Brikkoropon, planting of trees, and Nobanno, the first harvest of rice in his school. Apart from adding joy to the students' lives, some of these festivals brought the students and the villagers to work together. For years, Tagore tried to convince Indians through his speeches, stories, novels, poems, and songs to work for rural revival, rural reconstruction. The call went unheeded until Mahatma Gandhi came to the political scene. They were great friends, but they disagreed a lot. I'll come to that also, because that's also a big lesson to us. Tagore with his students. This is one of the festivals of spring. I know this is being celebrated in Loyola these days. I think this is going to be celebrated in June, if I'm not wrong, the Holi, the Festival of Colors. At this time, he traveled widely to West to see what elements from their education could be incorporated in his school. So he was always, open to ideas from all over the world. He was a true internationalist. During one of these travels, he happened to be carrying the translation of his poems, which he showed to a painter friend, Rodenstein. So he was in London, he showed these translations to his friend Rodenstein. So this book was called Gitanjali, which meant the song offerings. So Rodenstein liked it very much. So this is again Shantanu. So here is the picture. So Rodenstein is at the extreme right corner. So Rodenstein liked it very much, showed it to William Butler Yeats, who was a very famous Irish poet, who went on to say, I quote him, "I have not seen anything comparable to this written in the English language." After a quick succession of events, Tagore was the first Asian to get the Nobel Prize in 1913. The prize money was donated equally to the school and his estates, for the welfare of his estates. Right after the publication of Gitanjali in English, it was translated into many other European languages: French, Spanish, Swedish, Danish, Italian, Dutch, Russian, Czech, Hebrew, to name only a few. Not only the translations gained wide acclaim among readers from all over the world, but many of the Western composers also took up these poems to set them into musical pieces. Why am I talking about Gitanjali? Of course, it was a great, milestone in Tagore's life for Indians, for Asians, but there's another reason why I'm talking about that. The time when Gitanjali was translated, Europe was going through one of her worst phases in history. The First World War was looming large. So the sublime spirituality of these poems helped Europeans to find solace during their personal tragedies and losses in the subsequent years during the war. So I'll recount some of the poignant moments or instances of popular appeal of Tagore's poetry. So the first one is about the French poet Wilfred Owen. After the death of her son on the war front, just a few days, just a few days before the armistice, Owen's mother, Susan, was returned his personal possessions. In the notebook that Owen carried in his pocket, he had inscribed in his own hand poem number 96 from the Song Offerings, with the name of the poet inscribed below. I'll read a little bit of the poem. When I go from hence, let this be my parting word, that what I have seen is unsurpassable. I have tasted of the hidden honey of this lotus that expands on the ocean of light, and thus am I blessed. Let this be my parting word. My whole body and my limbs have thrilled with his touch, who is beyond touch. And if the end comes here, let it come, let this be my parting word. Ironically, Owen had recited these lines when for the last time he bid his mother goodbye, when they stood there looking out to France across the sea. Susan Owen wrote a letter to Rabindranath in August 1920, recounting this experience, still moved by the power of the poem that reverberated in her mind in the voice of her lost son. The French translation was done by André Gide, and the collection was called L'Enfant Lyrique. Impact of Gitanjali was perhaps the most, next to Britain, on Germany, understandably. Gitanjali's sublime poems mesmerized the German audiences. Tagore's lectures were always sold out, and there are accounts of gate crashes oftentimes. The translation in Germany was done by many, but mostly by Helen Meyer-Frank, who learned Bengali to translate it directly from Bengali. And it is perhaps not surprising that during summer of 1921, German publishers placed huge orders of Tagore's work, and by October 1921, more than 800,000 copies of this book was sold. Tagore was a phenomenal sensation in the Spanish-speaking world and continues to have a great impact even today. The translation was done by Zenobia Camprovi and Juan Ramanos Jimenez, who later on got the Nobel Prize himself. And this translation not only brought Tagore to Spain, but also to the Latin America. And in Mexico, he is still regarded very highly. And the Chilean poets Gabriela Mistral and Pablo Neruda were immensely influenced by Tagore's work. During the same time when Tagore wrote this book, the Gitanjali of the Song Offerings, he also wrote another book, a play, which was called Dakhor, which means the post office. This was about a small little boy who is not well, confined in his home, sitting by the window and talking to everyone who's passing by his window, the yogurt seller, the flower girl, the postman, and he writes a letter to the king, gives this to the postman to be delivered to the king, so he hopes the king will come and see him. The king, upon hearing this, sends the best doctor, the best healer, and the healer comes and says, open all the windows and don't confine him inside, let him go outside. But he eventually dies. So Tagore, in his own words, described this play as the spiritual freedom from the world of hoarded wealth and certified creeds. In the Nazi-besieged Warsaw ghetto, Polish doctor-educator Janusz Korczak had orphans in his care stayed at the post office in July 1942. Their deportation was scheduled the next day. So the few accounts that remain of this production, almost everyone who attended and participated died in October 1942, either at Treblinka or in the ghetto uprising. So the underlying mood was very heavy, tragic, but the children had hung on to every word coming from the stage. I don't have to tell you much, but what we see happening around us reminds us many of these things. Anyway, in 1915, he was awarded the knighthood, so he became Sir Rabindranath Tagore. In 1916, he traveled to the West, extensively made eloquent appeals for peace. He visited the United States many times and stayed for 17 months in total, which was the second highest after Britain, outside of India. He gave several lectures. So in 1916, he was in California. He gave several lectures in California. Lectures were always sold out, got reviews in the newspapers. There's one funny thing, though, I have to share. So one of the reports said that Tagore scolding the Americans for their quote unquote materialism. And then the report said, he is charging $700 per lecture. But of course, he was giving back to his school and states, but I found it really funny. Anyway, he gave several lectures in California, and during one of the breaks in Santa Barbara, he wrote to his son that I'm dreaming of founding a new university. Joshua, I know, it's special to you, to me too, because that's where I landed when I first came from India. So he proposed the name of the university, Vishwabharati, the world comes to India. So the idea of the university was like a concept of a world university founded at the end of the First World War, was with a determination to go beyond aggressive nationalism and to build friendship with all nations. Coming back to his visit in California, there was an attempt to assassinate Tagore. This was carried out by an Indian nationalist group. I told you that he was critical of them. This party was called the Gadar Party. They had a base in California, so they attempted an assassination because he was looked upon as an agent of the British administration. There was even much further, I'm not going into that, but prior to his next visit to the United States, here is the irony. Prior to his next visit to the United States, this time his visit being the East Coast in 1917, he was working with his publisher, the Macmillan Company, to dedicate one of his books, which was called The Nationalist, a compilation of essays to the then President Woodrow Wilson. So this was underway. And the British intelligence called the American intelligence and said, this cannot be done because Tagore harbored the nationalists in his school. So this process was nulled. He was very, very upset and, sad about this. But this is, he was a non-conformist. He was vocal whenever he saw something he didn't think was right. So coming back to our history, Indian history, in 1919, there was an act called the Rowlatt Act, designed by the British judge Sidney Rowlatt, was a law passed by the British administration in India in March 1919, indefinitely extending emergency measures enacted during the First World War. So this act effectively authorized the government to imprison without trial any person suspected of quote unquote terrorism living in the British Raj. So a lot of people were very critical about it, the Indians, including Mahatma Gandhi. Now, on April 13th, which is like the new year for many Indians, this year we celebrated the new year on April 14th, thousands of people gathered. So this is the Warsaw Ghetto that I talked about. This is in Urbana, Champaign. This is with them. Okay. So let me just be here now. So thousands of people gathered in Jallianwala Bagh, which was a garden in the northern part of India in Punjab, to celebrate this new year. So these people, this is a tradition for more than 200 years. People would come from all over India to this garden to celebrate the new year. People were traveling, and many of them were very simple villagers. News didn't travel so fast. They were not even aware of all these restrictions that the British had imposed. So they all gathered here. And the British Army, under the command of Brigadier General Reginald Dyer, opened fire on an unarmed gathering of men, women, and children. The Jallianwala Bagh, this garden, could only be exited on one side because there were 3 sides were enclosed by buildings. After blocking the exit with his troops, he ordered them to shoot at the crowd, continuing to fire even as the protesters or the people tried to flee. The troops kept on firing until their ammunition was exhausted. The firing lasted about 10 minutes and 1,650 rounds were fired 33 rounds per soldier. According to the sources, there were over 1,000 deaths and 2,000 wounded who could not be taken to the hospital due to the curfew. The press was gagged, but the news infiltrated. This happened on 13th April 1919. But by the end of April, the news infiltrated all over India. It reached Tagore in Shantiniketan, the abode of peace. He was devastated and shocked, and he just could not sit still listening to this. He wrote to Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and said, we should both go together to Punjab to show our protest. But Gandhiji did not agree. There were reasons why he did not. I'm not going into that. Then he came to Kolkata. He talked to the politicians, intellectuals, writers, and wanted to do a peaceful protest publicly. But no one showed much interest. There are a lot of reasons why this happened, some political. So dejected and disappointed, he lay awake the whole night. And in the morning of 30th May, he wrote a letter to the Governor General Lord Chelmsford renouncing his knighthood. And I'll read a little bit from that letter. Your Excellency, the enormity of the measures taken by the government in the Punjab for quelling some local quote-unquote disturbances has, with a rude shock, revealed to our minds the helplessness of our position as British subjects in India. The disproportionate severity of the punishments inflicted upon the unfortunate people and the method of carrying them out, we are convinced, are without parallel in the history of civilized governments. Considering that such treatment has been meted out to a population disarmed, resourceless by a power which has the most terribly efficient organization for destruction of human lives, we must strongly assert that it can claim no political expediency, far less moral justification. The accounts of the insults and sufferings by our brothers in Punjab have trickled through the gagged silence, reaching every corner of India, and the universal agony of indignation roused in the hearts of our people has been ignored by our rulers, possibly congratulating themselves for imparting what they imagine as salutary lessons. The time has come when badges of honor make our shame glaring in the incongruous context of humiliation, and I, for my part, wish to stand shorn of all special distinctions by the side of those of my countrymen who, for their so-called insignificance, are liable to suffer degradation not fit for human beings. So this is what he wrote, and he renounced his knighthood. So you can see a perspective of his life and how he was engaged in the social conversation issues, etc. In the last part of my talk, I'll offer a glimpse of his relationship with Mahatma Gandhi. They were the greatest of friends, but also they differed a lot. And that's a lesson to us. These days, we are always saying us versus them. So to quote the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who was very closely associated with Gandhi and Tagore, he said, Gandhi and Tagore, two types entirely different from each other, yet both of them typical of India, both in long line of India's great name. How rich and extravagant is India to produce two such men in a generation. Tagore and Mahatma met for the first time in 1915 and thus continued a friendship that lasted for almost 3 decades. They differed on many issues, philosophical and social. They debated publicly on their differences, yet retained the purest love, respect, and affection for each other. Deep down somewhere, they were tied to their common love for truth. Indeed, one is reminded of Roma Rolla's tribute, who said, quote, the noble debate between these two great souls embraces the whole earth, and the whole humanity joins in this august dispute. So 12th April 1919, just prior to Jallianwala Bagh incident, Tagore wrote to Gandhi, our authorities have shown their claws whose sure effect is to drive some of us into secret path of resentment and others into utter demoralization. In this crisis, you, as a great leader of men, have stood among us to proclaim your faith in the ideal which you know to be that of India. The non-cooperation movement under Gandhi's leadership based primarily on passive resistance, as many of you know, civil disobedience, also had components like boycotting government schools and giving up foreign clothes and embrace the Swadeshi products. Swadeshi means Indian made. Swadesh means own country, so Indian made products. Despite having a great cordial relationship with Gandhi, Tagore started to voice the differences. Why? Because his opinion was that it was easy for the privileged and rich to boycott these foreign materials, which were much cheaper than the Indian made, which were very expensive. So, and going to these schools were easier for them. And where do this, the underprivileged go if they boycott this? So he started to voice his differences with Gandhi, and they both started writing essays as open debates. Their friendship continued to flourish despite differences. In August 1932, the British announced that in the constitutional reform of India, the electorate will be divided between upper caste Hindus, Muslims, the lower caste Hindus, and other communities. Gandhi immediately wrote back to Prime Minister MacDonald, reminding him of an earlier agreement, and decided to go into fast unto death from 20th September unless the British government agreed to revise it. 20th September 1932, Gandhiji drafted a letter asking Tagore for his blessings. He said, "If you can bless the effort, I want it. You have been to me a true friend because you have been a candid friend, often speaking your thoughts aloud." Tagore wrote back, "Our sorrowing hearts will follow your sublime penance with reverence and love." And on the same day, he told his students, "The penance Mahatma Ji has taken upon himself is not a ritual, but a message to India and to the world." The great love and respect for each other becomes apparent from the fact that when Gandhiji's health deteriorated from this fast, Tagore, at the age of 70, undertook a long and arduous train journey to Pune in the sweltering heat. The journey was for 72 hours, no air conditioning. Shortly after Tagore arrived, luckily Prime Minister MacDonald accepted the revised version. Much joy broke out. Gandhi broke his fast and requested Tagore to sing one of his favorite songs from the Song Offerings. Now comes again the debate. In January 1934, India witnessed a devastating earthquake which took its worst toll in the state of Bihar. Gandhiji at the time was touring South India and gave a public statement, "A man like me cannot but believe that this earthquake is a divine chastisement sent by God for our sins. For me, there is a vital connection between the Bihar calamity and the untouchability campaign." He was very much against the untouchability. Tagore was shocked and immediately made a public statement. "It has caused me painful surprise to find Mahatma Gandhi accusing those who blindly follow their own social custom of untouchability of having brought down God's vengeance upon certain parts of Bihar. It is all the more unfortunate because this kind of unscientific view of things is too readily accepted by a large section of our society. I'm compelled to utter a truism in asserting that physical catastrophes have their inevitable and exclusive origin in certain combination of physical facts." Such was their friendship and mutual respect. Tagore wrote strongly in defense of Gandhi in less than a month. He wrote, "For some time past, I have been noticing a spirit of hostility amongst a certain section of my countrymen against the latest activities of Mahatma Gandhi. One can take no exception to genuine criticism, but there is always a difference between criticism and vilification. I have often disagreed with him in public and even quite recently have criticized his belief about the recent earthquake devastation in Bihar. But I have also enough regard for the sincerity of his religious convictions and his abiding love for the poor as to hold his differences of opinion with me with respect." So before I end, I'll just briefly again mention Tagore's visit to the United States. He was a big admirer of the United States. He sent his son at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign to study, much contrary to the practice among the Indian elites those days. They would send their children to England, but he sent his son to United States. The last visit in the United States was 1930, and by this time he was a world figure. He met President Hoover in Washington, D.C. In New York, there was a reception which was attended by many dignitaries. One of them was the then governor of New York, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Tagore addressed a crowd of 4,000 at Carnegie Hall. A performance was arranged at the Broadway to benefit his university, Vishabharati. Tagore, however, donated the entire proceeds to the mayor's unemployment relief fund. Exhibition of his paintings were arranged in Boston and New York. The underlying message that marked Tagore's speeches during his visit was a hope for a better understanding between India and the United States. In June 1940, after the fall of Paris, Tagore sent a message to the then President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt. I'll read an excerpt from that. All our individual political problems today are merged into one supreme world of politics, which I believe is seeking help in the United States. As a last refuge of spiritual man, and these few lines of mine merely convey my hope, even if unnecessary, that the United States will not fail in her mission to stand against the universal disaster that appears so imminent. In 1941, around 15th April, Tagore celebrated his last birthday. His birthday was May 7th, but by that time, the place got so hot that they would celebrate his birthday on the New Year, 15th April, and they'll close the school for a summer vacation. So that was his last birthday before, he passed away on August 7th, the same year. The last speech he wrote was called The Crisis of Civilization. On the occasion of his birthday, I'll read an excerpt from that. As I look around, I see the crumbling ruins of a proud civilization strewn like a vast heap of futility. And yet I shall not commit the grievous sign of losing faith in men. I keep telling myself every day this. I shall not commit the grievous sin of losing faith in men. I would rather look forward to the opening of a new chapter in the history after the Catholicism is over and the atmosphere rendered clean with the spirit of service and self-sacrifice. Perhaps the dawn will come from this horizon, from the east, where the sun rises. A day will come when the unvanquished man will retrace his path of conquest despite all barriers to win back his lost human heritage. Today we witness the perils which attend on the insolence of the might. One day shall borne out the full truth of what the wise men have proclaimed. By unrighteousness, man prospers, gains what appears desirable, conquers enemies, but perishes at the root. And the poem that maybe many of you know, so this is another picture of Mahatma Gandhi and his wife at Shantiniketan. These were the places he traveled all over the world. Tagore had very fruitful conversations with Einstein. They shared the same view on spirituality. I hope to talk about that one day. Helen Keller. This is an exhibition in Paris with Romarola, a painter at the age of 70. And this is the poem I read. Where the mind is without fear and the heart is held high, where the world is not broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where the words come out from the depths of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habits, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. And I'll end with a special, a visual. I don't know whether I can share it with everyone, but let's see. Need some help. So this is, sorry, this is sung by me. Music is by an American pianist who was a great friend of mine, Jeffrey Holland Bauer. And you can see Gandhi and Tagore together here.
The runaway road of the village, it lures my mind away. It stretches its arms out to the far distance, and my heart wanders away with its red dust. Out of the home, it seduces me. It beckons me, alas, at every lagging step. It runs away with me, leading me whither I do not know.
ছাড়া মীরা মাটি ভুলায় রে গ্রাম ছাড়া মীরা মাটি ভুলায় রে ওরে কার পাড়ি হাত পাড়ি ওরে কার পাড়ি হাত পাড়ি ভুলায় রে আমার ভুলায় রে গ্রাম ছাড়া মীরা মাটি ভুলায় রে যে আমায় ঘরের বাহির করে পায়ে 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 ধরে হরি হায় হায় রে যে আমায় ঘরের বাহির করে পায়ে 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 ধরে হরি হায় হায় রে ও যে কেড়ে চালায় রে ও যে কেড়ে চালায় রে ঝুলায় রে আমার ভুলায় রে গ্রাম ছাড়া মীরা মাটি ভুলায় রে ও বাকি কি ধান দেখো হবে ও বাকি কি ধান দেখো হবে কোথায় শেষ মেলে জেগে কোথায় শেষ মেলে জেগে ভুলায় রে আমার মন ভুলায় রে গ্রাম ছাড়া মীরা মাটি ভুলায় রে গ্রাম ছাড়া মীরা মাটি ভুলায় রে
Learning online, like.
Oh my gosh.
This brand new subscription free
Oh
mini
my
Wi-Fi
God, I
camera.
cannot even stop it.